This is Resonance 104.4 FM, flipping marvellous. I'm Nick Hennegan, and welcome to another slice of Literary London, where we talk about, well, you know, literature and London. Except not today. Because today, you may hear, I'm in a slightly windy, isn't it? A slightly windy Stratford-on-Avon, home, of course, of the Bard. And I'm here, actually, I might as well tell you, I'm here, well, because I like to be here. I'm here courtesy of an organisation called Screen Skills, and also an organisation called the Arts Council of England, who very kindly awarded me a place on a 2-day workshop that we've been studying here called Making Theatre Digital. And we've been looking at case studies at the Royal Shakespeare Company because they are currently filming Much Ado About Nothing. It's been fascinating, and in fact I'm going to get the skills people in. I'm going to get some of these filmy people in and television people in to have a chat in a few weeks' time. I was going to try and grab them today, but it's, you know, end of a conference, you know what that's like. So there's been 15 of us. We were at the Claw Institute, which is a place that holds very special memories for me because a few years ago, if you know Stratford-upon-Avon, the Claw Institute is on Waterside. A few years ago, it used to be called the World of Shakespeare. And the actual room we were in for the last couple of days used to be the World of Shakespeare, and it was also used as a theatre. And it was used as a theatre in 1990, I think it was about 94 or 96, for my play. I wrote an adaptation in 1992 of Henry V called Henry V, Lion of England. I've mentioned it before. We did it for one night at the Midlands Arts Centre in Birmingham. And it was one of those kind of crazy nights where I thought everyone was running for the door and it was a standing ovation. And in the bar afterwards, a bloke tapped me on the shoulder and said, "That was rather good. How do you fancy going to the Edinburgh Festival?" And I went, "What's that?" But I'll go anyway. And it was a company called Star Wars. They managed at the time people like Jasper Carrott and Phil Cool, and they took us to the Edinburgh Festival in 1992, and it was that really that gave me the inspiration, if you like, to launch Maverick Theatre Company. And the Maverick Theatre Company is all about access, and I went to Edinburgh, which if you've not been before, we're going again this year. Hot news off the press. Yes, I've just got the rights to a new play about Winston Churchill and Robert Lloyd George, but I'll tell you more about that. Sorry, David Lloyd George. I'll tell you more about that later. Hey, it's all going on here, isn't it? So it was rather marvellous, and I thought Edinburgh's such a brilliant place, and there are every space becomes a performance area. And being from Birmingham at the time, Britain's second city, sorry Manchester, I came back to Birmingham and said, "Oi, why don't we do something like that here?" They largely told me to go away, to be honest, the funding bodies at the time, but they soon warmed, and we set up the first professional pub theatre in Birmingham at the Billesley pub on the estate where I was dragged up, and we eventually did, you know, quite well, I think, for 8 years or so. But during that time, my play, Henry V, Lion of England, ended up doing quite well in Edinburgh as well. It also then, from Edinburgh, went to, more or less all around the world for quite a while, and then it came back to Birmingham, and we decided we were going to do it in Stratford-upon-Avon with a company called Almost Perfect Productions, and the late Ray Rosenberg, God bless him, and Neil Foster from the Birmingham Stage Company. And we performed with an actor called Michael Shaw, who was rather jolly good. We performed, I think, for about 3 months at Birmingham Rep, Birmingham Old Rep. And then we came to Stratford-upon-Avon for the summer. And we were in the very venue, as I've mentioned. It's now called the Claw Learning Centre. It's next to Carluccio's. You can't miss it. And we were there all summer, and a good time was had by all. So I've got very fond memories of Stratford. There's a sort of energy here as well, because of course we're not in London, and the acting company, come here and stay for the whole period of the season. And it's quite nice. They were very sociable to us. So they have, for instance, an RSC cricket match. They invited Maverick Theatre. They have an RSC rowing competition. They invited Maverick Theatre. Slight problem with that, of course, is the Royal Shakespeare Company is a company of many hundreds of people. Maverick had a one-man show. So our acting company was one. Stage manager, one. Me, one. So there were about 4 in our company, so we weren't able to put together a cricket team, and we didn't do the rowing either, but we had a great time. It's a lovely pub as well called the Dirty Duck. My mate Rob Williams, the musician, still has very fond memories of that place, and Pam, who used to run it. Pam was a legend in Stratford-upon-Avon at the time, and certainly a legend in that pub. She was a very formidable woman, very formidable. Jennifer Earle, I always say, have I said that right? Earle, Jennifer Ely. She was lovely. She was part of the company as well, and some very fond memories. So it's quite nice being back here. And I've been moved partly by that, also partly by Den of Geek, which is an American website, to have a little think about adaptations of Shakespeare. The Much Ado About Nothing, I'm reviewing it actually on bohemianbritain.com, which is kind of my podcast. And I mean, the story of that you may already know is that our Resonance FM podcast was voted the number 2 Bohemian podcast to follow in the world. Number 1 being in New York, and it made me smile slightly, because how can you be a successful bohemian? Does that mean you have like 2 tins of beans instead of 1? Have you got a bigger garret than anyone else in which to agonise and create? I don't know. The result was bohemianbritain.com. Go and have a look. Sign up for it as well, actually. There's a newsletter as well. It'd be great to hear from you. So it's a fairly new project. I started writing reviews at the Edinburgh Festival last year. These radio shows end up on there as well. So yes, bohemianbritain.com. Do get in touch and say hello. So I've been moved anyway to looking at adaptations, my own version of Henry V, Henry V Lion of England. I then went on to do a few more. I did a version of Hamlet called Hamlet, Horatio's Tale, with no other than Sir Derek Jacobi, he of I, Claudius. Sir Derek Jacobi was the voice of my old Hamlet. And then I did a Romeo and Juliet, which did rather well at the Edinburgh Festival, because rather than being warring houses, I decided to make it warring football teams. So it was Aston Villa and Birmingham City. Oh yes, I did think about Celtic and Rangers, but it's a bit more than footballs, that, isn't it? So I've got a bit, yes. So I stayed away from that. And there is a chance actually that we're going to be doing that again in Birmingham, at Birmingham Repertory Theatre. Watch this space. I've got a meeting with them next month. Hey, it's all going on, isn't it? But I wanted to look at adaptations of Shakespeare. In between the wind, hang on, a bit of wind, and you can hear that? Those are actually, I don't know if you could hear that. If you're listening in stereo, of course you will. Those were swans taking off. I am literally outside the Royal Shakespeare Theatre on the riverside. A very pleasant place it is too. There's a big wheel off to me right. The butterfly farm's down there somewhere. I've started watching a TV show called is it Shakespeare and Hathaway, daytime BBC television. One of those kind of gentle comedy whodunits thing. And I'm sure it's partly because actually I just like looking at scenes of Stratford. But yeah, so having done those adaptations, I'm working on a Richard III at the moment. I thought I'd share with you 1 or 2 films that I think are interesting. And probably, you may be aware or may not be aware, that really owe their very existence to Shakespeare. So, this is the kind of list of films that I think you might find of interest, and you can look them all up if you want to. You don't have to, love. You don't have to. My Private Idaho was a film made in 1991, based on really Henry IV Part 1, Henry IV Part 2, and Henry V. So my own Private Idaho, obviously, is about 2 male hustlers who travel the country and the world to find themselves and to find meaning in their lives. So one of the adaptations that just seems obviously Shakespearean, Keanu Reeves, of course, is the big name there. He played the character Scott, and pretty much lifted straight from Henry IV, where Henry's son, you may know, if you know the history plays, leads a rebellious life until he can inherit his father's fortune. Yes, My Own Private Idaho, made in 1991 and based on the Henrys. Another film that owes its roots to Shakespeare is She's the Man, made in 2006. Now, perhaps not the greatest film in the world, but as a Shakespeare adaptation, it's quite good, really. The gender swapping and the slapstick humour and little references to Twelfth Night do make it somewhat enjoyable, although, as someone made the point to me, I'm sure Shakespeare didn't bother too much with stupid montages and public displays of nudity. Did he? No, he had bottom. But that's about as... Yes. Anyway, She's the Man, 2006, based on Twelfth Night, don't you know. Now then, 2010, there was a film called The Tempest, and guess what? It was based on The Tempest, and a film directed by Julie Taymor. Excuse me. And almost a sort of an art piece as much as a film, really. I think she switches the gender of Prospero to Prospera, And many of the main elements of the film remain true to the Tempest. She does a really good job, really, not just casually changing genders within the film, but she deals with the consequences of these gender swaps as well. So the magical elements of this Tempest are quite remarkable, and a visually stunning film. So well worth a look. 2010, The Tempest, directed by Julie Taymor. I think I've got that right. Was it? Yeah. In 2003, there was a film called Deliver Us from Eva. Yes, EVA. Deliver Us from Eva, based on The Taming of the Shrew. Now, there's a few productions based on Taming of the Shrew, and let's face it, Shakespeare, provided he did exist, yes, I think he did, Shakespeare basically invented the rom-com. Yeah, so it's not surprising that many of our modern romantic comedies films that are based on his plays. So The Taming of the Shrew has probably generated the most rom-coms, as I mentioned earlier. Deliver Us from Evil is an urban adaptation of this with the same premise. So that's a difficult woman. Deliver Us from Eva, I should say, yes. Eva is the difficult woman. She becomes the subject of a bet. In this case, her sister's boyfriends and husbands complain that Eva is making their lives miserable. So they hire Ray to get Eva out of their hair. And of course, that's when Ray begins to fall in love. Oh, yeah, baby. This adaptation remains very true to the spirit of Shakespeare, while adding its own flair. Quite a good film. Deliver Us from Eva, 2003. This is an interesting one. Chimes at Midnight from 1966. It's sort of very loosely based on, I don't know, Henry IV Part 1, Henry IV Part 2, Richard II, Henry V, Mary Wise of Windsor. So it's a fairly obscure film, perhaps, but and arguably the one furthest from its source material. So Orson Welles doesn't just create a film, of course it was an Orson Welles film, doesn't just create a film based on Shakespeare, it's more like he completely destroys it and remakes it, recreates it, all blended together. The story follows Sir John Falstaff, of course, through his appearance in Shakespeare's various histories. And of course, even the name, Chimes at Midnight, from 1966, is from Henry IV. Which one is it? Henry IV Part... one of the Henrys, anyway. And I think it's a quote from Falstaff when Hal, the young Prince Henry, who's been carousing and, being a lad, doing naughty things, when he actually grows up, and then Falstaff, of course, who was the older, naughty leader of the gang, Henry V, when Henry becomes king, he shuns him. I know thee not, old man. And I think his response, Falstaff's response is, but we have heard the chimes at midnight, Master Harry. In other words, we've been carousing. But no, doesn't work out. Henry V decides he's going to be a good king, and he doesn't need ne'er-do-wells like Sir John Falstaff hanging around him. So yes, Chimes at Midnight, 1966. Created by Orson Welles, who always sort of does interesting things, doesn't he? I love this one, 1985, Ran. Kurosawa. I hope I said that right. Kurosawa. The director Kurosawa. The revenge and murder-filled classic King Lear, of course. And Kurosawa comes along and makes an incredible sort of badass version, as the Americans might say, but adds quite a lot of Japanese flair. So he takes King Lear from the UK and places him in feudal Japan, and then decides to toss in a few Japanese legends, and it's a brilliant adaptation, really. Obviously very Asian, some cultural tweaking here and there, but really the story of King Lear. And I say, it's visually really, really good. My mate Andy Bloom. How you doing, Andy? He's living in France now. He might not be listening to it. He might. Hello, mate. You all right? Yeah, I'm all right. Yeah. He's living in France now. He raved about this when it came out. Well, not when it came out. When he was talking to me about it. One of his favourite films. He likes his films, does our Andy. Ran, as in R-A-N. And that was released in 1985. Number 9 on this list. Yes, indeed. It sounds just like a pop pig DJ, don't I? Yeah, because that's what I used to do, yeah. I actually listened to my old radio station as well yesterday. BRMB. Oops, excuse the wind. That's not me, dear. It's the wind blowing. Yes, BRMB. It's now called... what's it called now? It's called something else now. Anyway, it was interesting. Gosh, I was on there. So, number 9, Kiss Me Kate, of course. Made in 1953. The Cole Porter classic. It's a bit more meta than people give it credit for, perhaps, but the main characters are acting in a production of The Taming of the Shrew. They're also living out its plot, of course. And the title comes from a line, again, like Chimes at Midnight, comes from a line within the Shakespearean classic, Kiss Me Kate. Because in the world of musical theatre, this film And the musicals are a classic. Yeah, Kiss Me Kate, based on the Taming of the Shrew. That was released in 1953. Moving right along, next number 8. Another adaptation based on the Taming of the Shrew is Things I Hate About You, from 1999. Ooh, another rom-com based on the Taming of the Shrew. But it's probably one of the most popular and well-made out of all the rom-coms on this list. Follows the classic story. Girl is a hard ass. Boy bets he can win her over. Boy falls in love. Boy gets into trouble. Classic teen drama, really, and a great adaptation. And of course, it features the late, great Heath Ledger as well, before he did the Joker. Rather sad story. Number 7 at 2000, Hamlet, which was based on Hamlet, a dark modern take on Shakespeare. Instead of Denmark, we find ourselves in the Denmark Corporation. So instead of killing the king, Hamlet's uncles murdered the CEO. There's a great scene where Ophelia sort of drowns herself. I say it's a great scene in the company fountain. So it's not the best made film, but it's certainly not. It's certainly one of the more ingenious films. It's a move from betrayal in a kingdom to sort of corporate betrayal. That doesn't sound that far off, does it? Yes, Hamlet. Released in 2000. Number 6. Hey, excitement. Throne of Blood. 1957. If you can hear that noise in the background, I'm outside at the Royal Shakespeare Company. I'm Nick Hennegan. This is Resonance 104.4 FM. We're also on Bohemian Britain and all over the interweb, really, aren't we? And I'm looking at Shakespeare adaptations, as I'm in Stratford-upon-Avon at the moment, outside the Royal Shakespeare Theatre. The Taming of the Shrew, Much Ado About Nothing is about to happen. And we're just running through a few films based on Shakespeare. Throne of Blood, 1957, based, of course, on Macbeth, another Shakespearean classic, which is a Kurosawa masterpiece. Again, Kurosawa. I hope I'm saying that right. You film guys will know. It's interesting how well Shakespeare tragedies translate into these sort of Japanese feudal tales, and they do kind of lend themselves, don't they? A lot of Shakespeare's sources were Holinshed and who else was it? The other one. But this works quite well. Follows the story of Macbeth. Some people consider it to be the best adaptation of Macbeth ever made. Some liberties are taken, but that's to be expected when you translate a classic tale for another culture. But well worth a look. Kurosawa's Throne of Blood from 1957. Number 5 on our top chart is, of course, Romeo and Juliet, based on Romeo and Juliet. And of course, I'm talking about the 1996 film that keeps the language of Shakespeare and uses it in a modern setting. And of course, I think it made every teenager in the 1990s swoon, didn't it, really? Also, one of the better soundtracks of any of the films. It's got a great soundtrack. And is it a bit soppy? But of course, it's based on Romeo and Juliet, isn't it, really? It's one of the soppiest love stories of all. And it's tugged at the heartstrings of angst-ridden teens since Shakespeare's day. But an accessible adaptation that almost everyone can understand. Of course, Leo DiCaprio and was it Claire Thingy-Bobby? They played the lead couple. Yes, 1996, Romeo and Juliet. At number 4, we've got A Midsummer Night's Dream, released in 1999, a film based on A Midsummer Night's Dream. One of the perhaps best films on the list, based on one of the Bard's best tales. An adaptation that's more modern in the sense that it's set in a more modern era, but not the present day. So it keeps slightly at arm's length. But it's quite funny, it's cute, holds true to the original, and they managed to capture some of the magic that's sometimes difficult to translate from stage to film. They do that quite well. So if you fancy having a look at A Midsummer Night's Dream, 1999. Number 3 on the list is Titus from 1999 as well, based on Titus Andronicus. Always laugh really when people imply that our media's gotten more violent over the years. All you need to do is, look at Shakespeare, Titus Andronicus. Perhaps one of the most violent of Shakespeare's plays, although I suppose the bloodiest has still got to be Macbeth, hasn't it? Some of the violent acts are quite violent, including cannibalism, actually. It's a revenge tale gone horrifically wrong, and Julie Taymor, again, manages to honour the horror of the original play without turning it into sort of a snuff film, really. So a really good film. Titus, released in 1999. Meanwhile, number 2, is West Side Story, of course. Everyone knows that, don't they? West Side Story, released in 1961. That one, yeah, that one. A film really shows how adaptable Shakespeare is, really. The bard didn't know anything about Puerto Rico gangs in New York, of course, all the difficulties of being an immigrant in America, but they made a brilliant musical of it. It's lifted Shakespeare out of the past and makes it far more relevant to the 1960s. I mean, there's some, amazing knife fights, and Maria's about as Puerto Rican as Shakespeare, but it's there's something about the adaptation that continues to speak, I think. And of course, they've just done, isn't Spielberg done a new version? Mason down the pub was telling me he likes his films just Mason down the pub. And of course, I suppose number one, although I'd add one I've forgotten actually, of course, Much Ado About Nothing. I shouldn't have forgotten that, should I? Because Much Ado About Nothing is what I just saw, and as I say, you can read a review of it, or the first half, because we're filming it. I'm not filming it. The RSC are filming it. So I watched the first half live last night, and I'm going to review it on bohemianbritain.com, a written review, and then I'm going to watch the second half on the telly when it comes out. I think it's going to be BBC 4, and they never announce when these things are going to happen. I think until the Radio Times comes out, but it's going to be soon, I think. And Much Ado About Nothing, I really like Ken Branagh's version of Much Ado About Nothing. Him and Emma Thompson, Ken and Em, when they were still an item. And they'd been together about, what was it you said? 4 miserable years, I think. I seem to remember saying. They were still together. And it's I really like it. Denzel Washington's in it. Keanu Reeves gets a bit of a pasting for his performance, but I don't think it's too bad at all. And I quite like, if you're into film geekery, I quite like the last shot of the film and the last line of Much Ado About Nothing, because in a sense actually it's in the title, isn't it? Yes. The last line is "Strike up pipers," and there's a brilliant musical score by Paddy, what's his name? Paddy, him. Strike up pipers, and then the last shot goes on for about it seems like hours, of course it doesn't, but it's minutes, and it's all one take, and it starts with the dancers, strike up pipers, following the revellers. It was actually a clever idea, because he filmed it in Tuscany, in a beautiful house, and the house was the set for the film. It was also the production base, so everyone kind of moved out to Tuscany for the shoot. And the camera actually starts with strike up pipers with the two lovers, and then it follows dancing hordes through the house. And then this is all one shot out into the back garden, and then it starts to rise up in the air, and then finally the last shot of the film is the villa in all its glory and the Tuscan hills, and the sun's just about to set, and it's all in one take. And apparently he did it I think they did 3 takes of that, and he had to, if they hadn't got it that time, the sun would have gone down and it would have been ruined, and it was the last day of production, I think. So yes, go and have a look at Much Ado About Nothing, Ken Branagh, Ken and Em. I say some fine performances, but I suppose really, if we're talking about Shakespeare adaptations, the king of them all has got to be The Lion King. Yeah, but 1994 that was released, based of course on Hamlet, quite incredible on its own. And as a Shakespeare adaptation, it sort of adapts the tale to lessen its violence, obviously, because it's a kid's thing, isn't it, really? And creates a happy ending, which doesn't happen in Hamlet, let me tell you. But it stays true to the themes of family betrayal, loss, and finding one's identity. Timon and Pumbaa, I hope I've said that right, are really just sort of teaching Simba. And above all else, to thine own self be true. So in this one, we get to watch Simba retake his kingdom. I'm sure Shakespeare himself would have been proud of that, but of course that doesn't really happen in as you know, Hamlet. Yes, it's not a happy end. So there you go. Those are my recommendations for Shakespeare film adaptations. Thanks again to the Den of Geek for suggesting some of those and also giving me the notion for it. If you'd like to get in touch, then please do, as always. Radio at mavericktheatre.co.uk is probably the easiest way. I am actually on Twitter. I think it's at Lit London Radio. That's not very easy, is it? I am on Twitter at Nick Hennegan. But that's not very easy either, Hennegan. So if you're on Twitter, say hello. And if you've got any films or comments, any films that you think I've missed out on, or if you disagree, then again, get in touch, either radio at mavericktheatre.co.uk, or on Twitter at Lit London Radio, or at Nick Hennegan. Anything else? Or, of course, go on the blog. Go to the blog Bohemian Britain, www.bohemianbritain.com, where there'll be a written review of the play that we saw at the Royal Shakespeare Company, Much Ado About Nothing, and these radio shows always end up on there as well. So that's about it, really. I mean, the wind's still blowing, the big wheels turning. Oh, there you go, hang on, a bit of wind. It's right on cue. The big wheels turning round the corner. The swans are bobbing on the River Avon. It really is a beautiful part of the world, and one of my faves. In fact, I think, were it not for London, I could probably live here. We'll see about that. But that's it from me until next time. Thank you very much for your company. Keep listening. As I do, get in touch if you've got any comments or think I've missed out on any films, or if you've got any ideas for anything you'd like me to cover. If you're perhaps a writer, you've written a book, get in touch. Let's have a chat about it. This is Literary London, and we are on Resonance 104.4 FM.